See, my dad taught me tonight is about respecting the dead, because this is the one night that the dead and all sorts of other things roam free and pay us a visit. Sorry. All these traditions, jack-o'-lanterns, putting on costumes, handing out treats, they were started to protect us, but nowadays, no one really cares. I didn't do such a good job, did I? What do you think? Hey. Okay? Need a rope here? Wait. That's right. There's another tradition. Very important. Always check your candy. Trick or...
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fear of God podcast, your favorite podcast, our favorite podcast. We're so glad you're here for this episode and this penultimate installment of Phase 1 of 2020-2020. We hope you all have been enjoying this series because we sure have. To know exactly what 2020-2020 is all about, go listen to our pre-cap episode from January for deeper insight. But basically, you guys and gals are voting on your favorite horror films from the last 20 years, and we are covering one from each year. This phase has included Shadow of the Vampire, Donnie Darko, 28 Days Later, House of a Thousand Corpses, Saw, Hard Candy, and last week we were joined by guest Paula Deming of the Death by Monsters podcast to talk about Bong Joon-ho's The Host. And today we are talking about a wild little film starring Rogue and William Stryker. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And y'all, we usually record in the evenings, so that's not that weird, but Reed came on a minute ago. He was rather harried, and he said he'd slept till noon and then played video games until about 4, which is not normal kind of behavior for Reed, but he's just running behind. But he'll be back. Hopefully a little fresher, a little ready to go. But in the meantime, we want you to know that at the Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, find us on Twitter, Instagram, or join us in the Facebook group for lively discussions. Because here at the Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain. Except for right now, when I'm going to explain, you can listen to Fear of God on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox, anywhere podcasts are found. If we're not there, let us know, and we'll try to be found on it. While you're at it, wash those hands. Then go subscribe to us on your favorite platform, and if said platform is iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and or a glowing review. You can also find us on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you'll find an episode archive and be able to purchase merchandise from the show. See fellow foggers and their fog swag like t-shirts, mugs, cell phone cases, pillows. Reed! Hey, buddy! You feeling okay? You feeling a little fresher?
Trick or treat, y'all. I got nothing other than just like,
oh, okay.
I want some candy. I want to go. I want to go to a store.
I gave you like 5 minutes there, and that's what you came up with.
I want to go to a store, and I want to. want to buy candy.
Oh yeah, that would be nice. Just going.
Yeah. Remember the good old days when you could just go to the store,
Just leave the house.
When you could just go to the store and buy. When a Three Musketeers was not like a
novelty.
Yes, and when it was not a life or death decision. I mean, like, oh my gosh.
Goodness gracious.
It's let's not get too depressing.
On that spirit, I was going to say on that note, hey buddy,
Hey.
let's not forget you're my running mate this election
Oh.
year. I got to be honest. I hope it's still an election year, but it's topsy turvy right now. A lot can happen.
That's true.
And primary season is basically kind of over, like so many things in life right now.
Yeah, true. True.
But hey, buddy, for the sake of argument, let's suppose another primary happened.
Oh, okay.
And we won.
We won.
Let's just do it.
Hey, is
Go
it
for
too
it.
early to call it at this point? Like, do you think it's too close to call at this point?
No. Please, no. I don't know. Like,
Okay. All right. So
I don't know.
Let's-
The bit only has so much life in it, and at a certain point, I don't want it to end because I'm scared of what that end might be. You know?
Sure. No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. We
You
just
see this white that's developing in my beard?
Oh, I
That's
see.
just
Yes.
gonna keep populating,
festering.
Yeah,
Yes. No,
'cause of-
understood.
Yeah.
I understand.
It's like the longer I'm in the house, the more the hair grows.
You see
the
these
more
little
the
bald
stress takes
spots
hold.
on my scalp? Yeah, that's same thing. Same thing.
But that was mildly purposeful, right? That was
Yeah.
There was some intentionality.
There was a
behind
little
that.
bit of intentionality. Indeed. Hey, buddy.
Hey,
How you doing?
I'm okay. We've had this parade of guests. We're not used to being just us
I know.
anymore.
I don't know what we
Like,
do. I don't know how we do this anymore with
so-
just us.
Do, are you the big spoon or am I the big
I
spoon?
don't know. It turns into 30 minutes of just, how you doing? I don't know. How are you doing? I don't know. What are you scared?
What you watching? No, we're not even gonna do it. Woo. What show is this?
I know. Well,
So Riri,
Yeah.
you have been playing the role of Lackey the Listicle, but he's
indeed.
in retirement for a little while because
Yeah.
there's no listicles left to
Yeah, just
we lament
we lament.
the lack
Indeed.
of listicles.
That is true. Because he will only make 2 more appearances for the time being. He is only going to show up. Well, hey everybody. He'll show up like now, and then next week, and then we're drawing to an end of this little phase of little.
But is he even showing up right now? Because there's no list to call for.
Yeah, there is.
There's no voting left to be done.
But there's I mean the voting is done, but the lists exist. Like we.
That's true.
So
Well,
we're
just take it away, little guy.
say whatever you're gonna say. Okay, Reed. Like I don't care anymore in this weird world ahead of us. I don't know what's happening. It's anarchy. I don't know what's.
Hey, speaking of anarchy, did you see? This is like right in our wheelhouse.
Oh.
In Louisiana, they've issued a curfew. Okay. Like a lot of the
I
country
did hear
is
about
under
this.
shuffle.
Oh.
Did you see this?
Oh my
They
God!
issued
I
some
did.
curfew, and the sheriff's office or whatever that did the alarm system to signal the curfew. They somehow inadvertently used the sound cue from the Purge films
Yes,
as
they
their
did.
signal
Yes, they did.
to bring the curfew into place. And it was only like some other person noticed it and was like, that's probably not
We should
what
not.
you
We
want.
should not be doing this. Who?
For like 5 minutes, the murder rate just shot through the roof.
It's like everybody's like, I knew it was gonna happen. I was waiting for this. In so many homes across the country, somebody was just like, ha ha ha, and it's like, oh wait, I mean, my bad.
Yeah.
And they
I
later
was playing.
they later apologized for it, but I'm like, nobody,
Well, sure.
nobody vetted that. Like nobody, you didn't play it for anybody else. Like who was in charge? Let's play this out for just a second. Like who was in charge of saying like, hey, you know what we really need? We need a sound cue to let everybody know that the curfew is underway. So, Bob, can you go find us one of those? And Bob's like, sure, okay, I'll do that.
Sure.
And then goes.
I seen this movie the other night.
He bring that looked pretty effective on the movie. Let me use that. I didn't finish it. How does it end? Does it end good?
Is it March 21st?
Oh my gosh. So but I did see that story, and that's ridiculous. In our crazy news, a man was arrested. You can't make this stuff up. A man was arrested because he got into a fight over toilet paper in a store, and the person that he punched, which earned him the arrest, was his own mother. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Like, in our little town. I am not making it up. You can't make it up. In our little town.
You could, but you don't have to.
Could.
Why would you?
Have to.
Just read the news.
I mean, like, if there's any sort of evidence of
what
how,
a
like,
what a wild world when the content we cover is comfort food.
Right, like, please, can we get into these vampires, werewolves, and demons as quickly as possible, please? Because I need some peace of mind. Okay, I need to come out from I need to escape into the world of violent, like, vicious, brutal deaths for just a few minutes, please.
Yeah. Because it's gonna end. The credits will roll on that.
Yes, exactly. But no, in all seriousness, we've been kind of dancing around it, but clearly a little punchy tonight. But we are nearing the end of phase 1 of 2020. So normally this is the moment when I would call upon you to visit thefearofgodpodcast.com and go vote. But as of this recording, the voting has ended. Your opportunity to influence these particular lists has concluded. So hopefully you were able to go in and cast your votes. Next week, we are going to be covering your favorite horror films of 2008, counting down that list, and covering another entry. We'll announce that at the end of the episode. And this week we are covering 2007, but as I mentioned, the voting themselves is done. So without further ado, let us get into the list of your favorite horror films of 2007. Nathan, would you prefer to do evens or odds on this one?
I'll go odds.
Okay, so I will kick the list off. If you will permit me a brief moment before we dive into the list, I wanted to mention, I rarely do this, but I feel like when there's a number 11 that is sort of worth mentioning, I'd like to just sort of throw that in there. So not making your top 10, but kind of as an honorable mention, what would have been your number 11 is Rob Zombie's Halloween remake. So I figured since we covered House of a Thousand Corpses, I would take note of the fact that Rob Zombie's Halloween just barely missed the top 10 favorite horror films of 2007. So number 10 is probably the biggest surprise to me of any of these lists. Number 10 shocked me to pieces. It is Paranormal Activity, directed by Oren Peli.
Why does that? It shocks you that it's not higher?
It shocks me that it's not higher. I mean, Paranormal Activity is one of our most listened to episodes.
I was going to mention, so that is Fog Cannon episode 91, and not just that. I saw when I saw this list, I was like, "Come on, what is going on here?"
Right.
So,
right.
Listeners, you don't get this behind the scene data metrics that we get to see. Paranormal Activity, our episode on Paranormal Activity. This recording right now is for episode 175. Not including bonuses. So we're at probably, 180 something?
Yeah.
Of 180 plus recorded conversations, at number 3 in downloads is Paranormal Activity.
Which is crazy to me.
And it is behind the first conversation, The Quarterly King, on the first It film, which was a massive box office success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And had a lot of people in that conversation. And so it kind of makes sense, even though that feels impressively high. And so it's behind that, and it's behind the very first Fear of God episode, which people naturally are just going to listen to know.
Right.
If they want to know what this show no longer is whatsoever, like, that's what they go to.
Can you really visualize a tree by looking at the seed? Like, that's really what, that's what we're doing. Like, can you really?
That's like the most beautiful metaphor I think I've ever heard you use. I loved it. Can you say to a rainbow, "Hey, rainbow, stop being a rainbow"? No, you cannot. So I am genuinely curious for the foggers out there. I want to just hear the wild speculation over why Paranormal Activity is so high
and continues to rise. Like, we've had episodes
it's
like Surge.
It's gonna topple the first one.
I know, like people continue to keep going and checking out that episode, and it's legit. Listen, don't get me wrong, it's fun. I mean, we have one of my
it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yes, it's one of my. It contains one of my favorite spontaneous bits that we've ever done on this show. That of recontextualizing the entire concept as actually like a unrequited love story. Yeah, normal activity where the ghost just wants friends. But no, like it's
can't sleep.
Oh, it's anyway. So yes,
so
number
yes,
10.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Number 9. Johnny Depp came out last week. Johnny Depp, here we are again, is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, directed by Tim Burton and starring Johnny Depp. And I presume Helena Bonham Carter, though I can't recall specifically.
She's in it, and Alan Rickman.
Seems like a natural. Really?
Yeah, he's in it. In a prominently antagonistic role.
Or should I say, red?
You need 2 words to get really the effect.
I know.
You need.
Yeah.
You know, no, here's how he does it. Is
Okay.
oh, really? That is a pause I am not shortening in this.
Chew that scenery, Snape.
Oh man. So yeah, you've seen this one, right? Have you seen this?
I saw it in the theaters. That was the last time I saw it, but yes.
Gotcha. That was the last time I saw it as well. I mean, I remember liking it, but I don't remember responding.
Too much music. Too much singing.
It's a musical. There was too much music in that one.
Why is
okay.
everybody singing while they're getting a haircut?
Meat pies. So, number
I seen that Midsommar.
Number 8 is a film that I love so much. I would love for us to eventually cover this one. This is a really great film. It's called Time Crimes, directed by, I'm going to butcher this name, but directed by Nacho Vigalondo. And it is a film that hit my radar as one of those just somewhat spontaneous little, this looks interesting. It has a really intriguing cover image. The cover image is of a figure in this particular costume and looked really arresting at the time. And it is justifiably a horror film. I think it is more so a speculative science fiction film, but it is, I literally don't want to say too much about it because it is a film you need to just sort of go into blind and experience to the best of your ability, but it is a remarkable film. It's a film I love. So if you have the opportunity to see Time Crimes, do so.
When we finally get around to it, I'll just know because you'll text me and I'll just be like, it's time crime time. And I'll be like, okay, it's time crimes time. It's really my hope that there's a mime in this movie.
It's time. You know what time it is? It's time crimes time.
Time crimes time. I love that mime. All right, so number 7 on this list is the film Grindhouse, which is an anthology film featuring the pair of not quite feature-length films, Planet Terror and Death Proof. I can't even talk. By Robert Rodriguez, Tarantino, Edgar Wright's involved, Rob Zombie's involved, Eli Roth involved. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of cooks in this.
So actually, okay. So have you ever seen either of these films?
Clearly, I have not. The way I just described it. Time crimes time.
Time crimes time. So,
somebody please.
So, Grindhouse was an experimental theatrical experience because
I know what it is.
Yeah,
I've never seen it.
But like Planet Terror and Death Proof are absolutely feature length. Like they're 90
okay.
Yeah, they're like 95 minutes each. So, but like they were, if you saw them in the theater, it was intended to be like this double feature billing, and there were these short pieces. What they really are, there's these 3 little like trailers. They're imaginary trailers for imaginary films, directed by Edgar Wright, Rob Zombie, and Eli Roth. I forget which one did this. I think it was Eli Roth. But one of the films was starring Danny Trejo, or one of the little like short clips starred Danny Trejo, and it was for an imaginary film called Machete that they then later went and turned into. They made it into
what?
Machete.
Say it again.
Machete.
Well, the reason I
Time
started
Crimes
giggling there is how I totally yada yada'd this.
You really
listing of
did.
the Grindhouse with the such and this. There's a lot of words on this list right now.
you were like trying to fumble through it, like this is a film. Not
I
quite
say a lot at
feature-length.
the top of the show, and my mouth gets worn out. Hey, because you know how I sometimes start movies late. When the time comes, will you please alert me to the Time Crimes runtime?
So you know how much time you need to devote to the runtime of Time Crimes Time. This is not the entire
I've missed
list.
you.
The entire list is going to be overshadowed by this nonsense right
We've
now.
had
The
all
entire thing.
these people up in our house.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
it's just me and you. Move along.
So, my favorite part of your listing, that number 7, is just where you're like, it has some other material by like Edgar I. Robinson. There's a lot of
A lot of
people.
names.
It's a lot of words. So number 7 was Grindhouse. Number 6, featuring our very beloved director Danny Boyle's film Sunshine, which is a film we've both seen, and that, if memory serves, you are incredibly fond of. As am I. Is that
Right.
accurate? Yeah, it's
That
a really
is
great
accurate.
film. You got any more to say about that, or
No, you just said, "Is that accurate?" And then you just didn't even let me talk. You didn't even let me answer. You just moved on. It was like, oh.
Well, I'm losing confidence
no
that you'll
more
be able to
time.
put together a coherent sentence. Like, let me just make sure I ask yes or no questions. Anything else is like sketchy
It is
at
not
this point.
prime time over here, for Time Crimes. Okay, number 5 on this list is not prime time for me. It is bedtime. Is Wreck. Wreck-It. A Wreck-It Ralph joke tried to happen just then, but it didn't work.
Oh my
Directed
gosh.
by my text isn't big enough on here. Wreck, directed by oh, why is Paranormal Activity so high on the list?
I'm literally crying.
By
Oh my gosh.
Yom Balaguero and Paco Plaza. We're gonna move along, please.
Listen,
Quickly.
listeners,
This is an anthology film, right? Like, there's just some shorts.
it's
No?
not. It's not. The reason I'm laughing so hard and having such a hard time speaking is because listeners didn't get to see the face you made when you tried to. It's like I
We
could
need to
see.
video this stuff.
I could see it in your eyes, like as suddenly you're like, "Is Wreck directed by?" And then it's like this
Got real squinty.
this tenuous cliff you had to leap off of to try to get this name right, and your eyes got so big, and it just cracked me up so much.
Ooh,
Oh.
here I go.
So no, sincerely. Okay, I got to rein it in because this is a really good movie. Okay, so Wreck, which is in case people don't know, it's not like the word wreck as in Wreck-It Ralph. It's Rec, REC, as in the record function on your camcorder.
I'm gonna wreck it.
And it's directed by, I don't know if I'm going to do any better with the name, but directed by.
Don't. No, why are you gonna try again? Just
I don't know.
read
So,
what
and-
I got. It's on the record. Just talk about the
It's
movie,
there.
the
It
record.
is there. But this film is remarkable. It's like it's a bit of a chamber piece. It is a single. The premise is that there are these this sort of infection running rampant in an apartment building, and this reporter is chronicling the activities of a fire station, coincidentally on the same night that they are then eventually called to respond to this infestation. And so the film, quickly pivots into, pretty harrowing stuff. It was coincidentally remade as the film Quarantine, starring, gosh, what is her last name? The star of Exorcism of Emily Rose, Jennifer Carpenter, I think is her name. So the film, Wreck, or REC, was remade as Quarantine. Personally speaking, I didn't care very much for Quarantine, but I am very,
I don't
very
either.
fond.
Oh,
None of us
or
like
the
it
film.
at this point. But I am very, very fond of the film Wreck. If you have the opportunity to see it, it is a really remarkable film, very affecting, and so despite our inability to giggle through it, but
no, I don't have an inability to giggle. I'm very able at that. I think I was thinking of VHS. That's an anthology film, right?
You are correct about that. Yeah. So VHS and its sequels.
VHS
Yeah.
Wreck. You can sort of see.
I can actually.
Okay.
That's pretty good. But yes, VHS and its sequels are each anthology films. Wreck is not. And it is your fifth favorite horror film of 2007. Trying to move on. Number 4 is our featured coverage for this week. It is Michael Dougherty's film Trick or Treat. We will share so many of our thoughts about that film momentarily. Nathan, go ahead on number 3.
Number 3, coming in at Fog Cannon episode number 130 as part of our 19 series. Maybe.
I believe. It
is The Mist, directed by Frank Darabont and starring Tad Jane.
Oh my gosh, listeners who have not kept up don't know
is a
that.
serious Fear of God deep cut right there.
Oh, it really is. Oh, it absolutely.
All you got to do is go listen to 1922 episode and then Before I Wake episode, and you're gonna get a hell of a good time.
that on both of
You
those.
got it.
Absolutely. Number 2 in the list is also in. Man, these films just keep getting better and better. Number 2 on the list is The Orphanage, directed by J.A. Bayona, and honestly, like
Fear of God 78.
True. Fear of God 78. It is a powerfully affecting film. Go back and check out our episode about it. We are very, very fond of that movie. We love it tremendously. And honestly, there's a world in which I would fight for this to be number 1, but I think number 1 is kind of just unbeatable in terms of, like, it absolutely deserves to be number 1. So what is number 1, Mr. Nathan Rouse?
Number 1 is the sequel to number 8, and it is Time Crimes 2. I'm sorry. Number 1 on this list is Zodiac, coming in on Fear of God episode 44, directed by David Fincher, starring Mysterio, the Hulk, and Iron Man.
Listeners, if for some reason you have made it this far into either our episodes or just life in general, and you have not seen Zodiac, prioritize Zodiac. Zodiac is an incredible film. It's an amazing...
You just said that word like Moira Rose.
Prioritize.
Prioritize. Sorry.
Did I say it like Moira Rose?
It just did I say that?
Yes. Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, well deserving of the top spot of your favorite horror films of 2007. Nathan, while I make a couple of observations about this list, if you would be so kind as to pull up Box Office Mojo's listing of the top 5 grossers of 2007. So what's interesting the first thing that jumped out to me about this particular list is this is like the rise of Spanish-speaking horror. Like, Time Crimes is a Spanish-speaking film. Wreck is a Spanish-language film. The Orphanage is a Spanish-language film. And I don't think any other of the lists that we've counted down so far have quite so many foreign-language films, particularly not from the same region, all in succession. So this was remarkable to me that this particular year, 2007, saw at least 3 that resonated pretty deeply with at least some of our listeners. And I think particularly in the case of Wreck and The Orphanage, I think Time Crimes is a little bit more of an obscure sort of undiscovered gem, but I know Wreck gets talked about a lot, The Orphanage gets talked about a lot, and all from 2007, which I think is really quite remarkable. You got the Box Office Mojo list up for us?
Do I ever read?
Hit us with number 5.
So, 2007 worldwide box office 1. That was a really good Fear of God top 10 list. That was good.
Yeah.
Some good stuff on there.
I
I don't
had a lot
even
of
mean
fun.
to start going through it. I mean
No,
Just
there's some
film
great
quality.
films. Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to
Last year's.
as opposed to the 2007 worldwide box office.
Oh.
This is so crazy. It's why do we do this to ourselves?
Started off so interesting.
It is worth mentioning. So at number 11 on this list of worldwide box office is The Bourne Ultimatum, which is a fantastic film and is so much better than almost everything else above it. At number 8 on this list, I'm only bringing it up because you and I saw it together, is the Simpsons movie. Do you remember you and I seeing that together?
I do
was
remember
standing
that.
in line with you.
Yes.
To go see that movie.
That was so special. I loved it. Spider Pig.
2007.
Spider Pig does
I don't remember
whatever
a
a
thing about
spider
it,
pig does. Oh, okay.
But I was with you. So,
That's all that
number
matters.
5. Number 5 is the first installment, having much more money at number 5 than previous number 5s here at 709 million, is the first installment of the Transformers franchise.
Oh, okay. Which,
Yeah.
which honestly, that first one and the much later Bumblebee are really the only two that I would highly recommend Bumblebee. I would
Yes, Bumblebee's good.
softly recommend the original Transformers. After that, they just go downhill very, very quickly.
Number 4 on this list, I don't know that I ever saw it, but coming in with $813 million in worldwide box office is Shrek the Third.
Okay. I mean, I like all of the
Yeah.
Shrek movies. They're fun. I enjoy them.
Do you?
I do.
That was a real soft recommendation.
I mean, I do. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's over. Number 3.
Moving on.
Number 3 on this list, and what certifiably sank this particular franchise, even though it made $894 million, almost $895 million, is Spider-Man 3 from Sam Raimi. and Tobey Maguire.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised
know-
it's so high because Spider-Man 2 was such an outstanding film.
Correct.
But yeah,
Everybody had to see them dance moves, right?
that is the weirdest Spider-Man moment in the history of Spider-Man cinema. It's so strange. So
I do
weird.
love that they play with it in Spider-Verse.
Yeah. Yes.
I went to go see Spider-Man 3. It is after we moved to Charlotte, and there's an IMAX theater here in Charlotte, and I was dumb enough to not know that there were distinctives between IMAX theaters. I don't know if you know this.
Oh,
but this
like giant
particular-
screen versus true IMAX? Is that what you mean?
Well, no, I don't even mean that. I mean, in true IMAX, there's planetarium-style IMAX, and then there's not planetarium-style IMAX.
Oh.
Well,
gotcha.
the IMAX that we have locally is planetarium style. So, brother, Spider-Man 3 is not a good movie.
No.
I watched it like I was completely surrounded by it. Like,
That's so
for-
painful.
for 2 character scenes when they're talking to each other, you're going to enjoy this, but listeners can't see it. Like if characters, in a normal movie, you're watching the screen and people are talking, one's
Yeah,
on
of course,
the
of
left
course.
side, one's on the right side. I had to go.
Oh, no.
I had to completely turn my head to the left to see look at that character, and then completely turn my head to the right. That is how painful.
So, not only was it a subpar film, it was actual exercise. It was work.
Yes,
it was work,
it was work.
to try to see
It was
this
work.
movie. Oh, that's disappointing.
Number 2 on this list, which is unfortunate considering what number 1 is. Number 2 is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix at 941 million.
I wondered because Harry Potter didn't show up in last year's top box office, and so I was like, okay, well, clearly,
Well, that's because
it's
it skipped a year.
because it wasn't. Yeah. So there was no Harry Potter film made in 2006. So I was like, okay, we got to be coming up on one soon. I know there wasn't a huge distance in between the films, so I was actually thinking it might be number 1, but that's too bad.
What's interesting is Order of the Phoenix is the first film that woke me up to affection for the franchise.
Really? Had you seen
Yeah.
the others before you saw that? Or?
I can't remember. It's possible. I can't quite recall. I don't remember.
Okay. All right.
It's lost to time, like a time
Hey,
crime.
You okay? How you doing? No, just kidding.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I really just can't remember. The number 1 on the list is
Oh boy, I'm ready.
at 960, almost 1 million, is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End.
I mean, okay. I mean,
No.
that
I can't. I remember being so mad at that second movie after I left it. I don't know if I watched this. Because I remember
I
watching
definitely
the second
saw
one
it.
and thinking it's so dumb, and getting to the end and being like, I'm dumber now. Anyway, which is saying a lot considering how the last 30 minutes have gone.
Oh man, I don't care for the Pirates films past the first one. I just really don't. I've been wondering for a while actually if maybe time would be kinder to it, and if I could go back and rewatch it with like a fresh perspective, if I might appreciate certain elements more. But I just can't bring myself to do it. They're long movies. I don't have very fond memories of them. What I do remember about them, I remember not being very impressed, and remember in at least enough detail to know I don't think I want to try that again, because I've seen the first one a handful of times and love it every time. But yeah, the rest are not up to the same par.
They're long, they're bloated, they're boring.
Yeah,
it's just silly.
Yeah, agreed. So that puts another installment of 2007 edition in the books. And we are now going to be pivoting over to speak about one of the films from the list. It is actually, so we're spending the entire episode about the fourth favorite film in the list, but that is primarily because we have already covered the top three. We already covered The Mist, The Orphanage, and Zodiac. So this one, unlike Rec, which understandably was confused for VHS, this one is an anthology film. Had you seen it before or knew anything about it before you knew we were covering it for this?
I was totally unfamiliar. All I knew was the imagery of the little guy. Sam guy.
Oh, Sam. Yeah.
I didn't know anything beyond that. Now, are there sequels?
So Trick or Treat 2 has been announced, but it was announced kind of. I forget exactly how its production schedule coincided with like the hit of COVID-19 and the impact there. So I don't know what is happening with it. Probably nothing at the moment, unless it was in just the development stages, and perhaps development is still being discussed by remote access or something. But yeah, Trick or Treat 2 has been announced officially, but beyond that, there wasn't ever anything beyond this. It was spawned originally from a short animated film featuring the Sam character. And that was it. Otherwise, then it was brought into feature length.
Now, this is I actually didn't look at this, but Michael Dougherty did Krampus, right? And
he did, yeah. So he wrote and directed Krampus. He also wrote and directed Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I know you've seen.
That's what I thought.
And he, I don't know if, let's remind everybody about that. So. He also has at least, I know he's credited at least with the story for the eventual upcoming Godzilla vs. Kong. So I don't know exactly his level of involvement, but something that I found interesting and that I did not remember until doing the research for the film. I didn't know until I saw Bryan Singer's name on the casting list, which yes, that's awkward and a bit uncomfortable.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
But he was directly sort of associated with like he wrote the screenplay for X2, X-Men United. Michael Dougherty did.
Really?
And yeah. Oh yeah. He wrote the screenplay for X2. He also wrote the screenplay for Superman Returns. And so it's like he had kind of been in the ether as a writer.
No
primarily.
wonder Brian Cox is in this.
Well, yeah,
I was being silly. Yeah.
Brian Cox and Anna Paquin.
I know, but. Yes.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the film? So the film is officially in I included it as a nominee in 2007, but there's a little bit of a storied history. So if listeners looked up right now on IMDb, oh, what's this Trick or Treat? Wait a minute, this is the best films of 2007, and IMDb lists this as 2008. What's going on with this? So this has a crazy, a little bit of a labyrinthine history. The film was completed and originally set to release theatrically in October of 2007. But it was pulled from the release schedule. The studios never gave a concrete reason for why they pulled it. So there's a couple speculations, but it debuted like that year in December for like a like at some small little festival, and then it got pushed for release in October of 2008, but then ultimately ran like a couple of festivals and never got released to theaters in 2008 either. So then it got released eventually straight to DVD release in October of 2009. I cannot find, could not locate what the affirmed reason was for its continued delay. There's a lot of speculation. One speculation I saw was that in 2007 they did not want it to compete with Saw 4, which was a film that they expected to have at least pretty substantive box office success given the appeal of the franchise. So they didn't. The speculation is they didn't want it to compete with Saw 4, so they pulled Trick or Treat from the release and banked their money on the franchise entry. Another speculation said that they were disappointed with the financial performance of Superman Returns, which he had co-written, and basically were kind of not really confident in exactly how the film was going to perform. So it just boggles my mind. Made in 2007, listed on IMDb as a 2008 film because that's when it sort of started to hit the festival circuit, and then finally released straight to DVD in October 2009 without a widespread theatrical run. That is the storied release history on this film, which I still find pretty remarkable. But before we get into too many more trivial bits, did you enjoy it? General thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I had no idea, other than just what I think is a pretty effective creature design on Sam. I had no idea what on earth it was, what was it? I didn't know it was about Halloween. Well, I guess that's stupid to say Trick or Treat's in the title, but as in I didn't know the anthology aspect, which is then rooted in Halloween style traditions and whatnot.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. I think it's pretty wild. I mean,
Yes.
It's funny. There's this weird corollary happening for me, although I don't think they're on the same level whatsoever, of our conversation about the host last week, and just the nature of a narrative that does not have a straight line. Because while anthology is not an incorrect word for this film, it's also not traditionally structured as an anthology.
Not at all. No.
And so there is a narrative here. Its anchor point is kind of Halloween as an idea.
Right.
But it all takes place within the same universe, within the same night, effectively. I thought you would divulge or reveal something to this effect, but didn't mention anything about it. Even the kind of comic booky aesthetic of the credits and stuff are a little interesting. I don't know. I couldn't quite tell if it was rooted in some previous existing material or what. So I don't know.
Well, and I think could be wrong. Didn't find this specifically in my research, but I would have equated that to a desire to pay homage to like the EC Comics kind of thing, like a bit cut from the Creepshow cloth, if you will.
Yes.
That along.
Well, I can see that
lines.
because what research I did find, or what research I did do, did reveal just how much it's larded with sort of horror ideas of other sources, right?
Right. Yes.
There's a lot going on. Sorry, that was really hard to find what I was trying to say there, but there's a lot going on that's homage to other things.
Oh, absolutely.
So that would make some sense. The EC Comics Creepshow thing.
So it's interesting. You said in. Oh no, you go ahead.
No, all I was going to say was a summary statement of like I found it entertaining.
Sure.
Kind of enjoyable from that standpoint.
Gotcha. You mentioned earlier that like you felt, or at least expressed a bit of, it should have been obvious this is about Halloween because of the title Trick or Treat. Ironically, the original title was supposed to be Season's Greetings, which is what the animated short was called. But when they were in development for it, and I think this was probably a good call, they thought, well, we don't want people to think this is a Christmas film because if you do season's greetings, and then people think it's a Christmas film. They come in, you're going to get people kind of upset that they signed up for something that they weren't really ready for. So they went through a number of different other titles, finally landing on Trick or Treat. The only reason that it's Trick or Treat and not Trick or Treat, it's like Trick apostrophe R, like Toys R Us or something. The reason it's like that is because I think at a comparable time to its development, there was another film that was tentatively titled Trick or Treat, and they just didn't want a lot of the associations, and so they instead just sort of dropped the O, substituting an apostrophe there. You mentioned just a second ago that there are lots of homage to different sort of other horror entries, most specifically the work of John Carpenter. Like Brian Cox's appearance,
I did read that. Yeah.
Yes, is directly mirrored after the general appearance of John Carpenter. Anna Paquin's character in the film is named Laurie. That is a direct call out to Laurie Strode from Halloween. There is also, it can be seen in the internal sequence with the kids and the bus and the dead bus kids. There's an old car that is the same car from Christine, John Carpenter's Christine, based on Stephen King's novel. So there's a tremendous amount of homage to not only horror films, but you mentioned just Halloween lore, Halloween traditions, the sort of cloth, the fabric head character that we keep calling Sam. That's actually his name is short for Samhain, which is it's pronounced Samhain, and it's spelled Samhain, Samhein, which is the traditional Celtic festival from which a lot of Halloween lore extends. And his name, that's kind of how he's been nicknamed Sam, which again I find interesting. I just have two more brief bits of trivia. We've mentioned both the presence of Anna Paquin and Brian Cox, who were both in X2, which we've already said was co-written by Michael Dougherty. Also, I thought it was interesting. If you see a character in the film, a child who has a mask completely covering their face, that is probably played by a little person as opposed to a child, because so much of the filming had to take place at night and they were restricted a lot by child labor laws and filming and everything like that. So if ever you see a scene where a character is completely obscured by a mask, chances are that is not being played by a child, which I thought was kind of interesting.
But at the same time, did I not read that the little boy in the costume shop is also who is the kid in the Sam costume? I'm pretty sure I read that.
Yes. What is his name? Quinn Lord, I think, is the little kid's actor, the little kid actor who plays him. But yes, he actually is also playing the Sam character. Yeah. So you mentioned that the film is kind of, we can head over into likes, dislikes, unless you have some other trivial mentions, but you mentioned the unconventional nature of this anthology film. That is one of my very favorite things about it. In what would be classified as like your traditional anthology film, the runtime of the film is broken up by these smaller segmented stories, and each story has a beginning, middle, and end, and then it cuts, and then it moves on into the next one. What's interesting about this one is that in many of the cases, the stories overlap and intersect with one another in some really interesting ways. Characters from other stories are frequently seen in the background or in passing during a different story, so that everything kind of ties together as a singular cohesive piece. For instance, even like 3.5 minutes into the film, and you wouldn't have known this like through a first viewing, but like 3.5 minutes into the film, the school bus kids are walking by in the background of Mr. Krieg's house, just long before their story is unpacked, but precisely when they would have been walking by in the events of the night of the film. So it's,
you don't mean the teens in the school bus kids story, you mean the school bus kids who come back to haunt?
Yes, exactly. Yes, who come back to
who
haunt
show up
him.
on his doorstep.
Precisely, exactly.
That's cool.
And so, that's so in other words, the beginning of the film, the very beginning of the film, ties together very directly to the ending of the film in ways that when you go back and watch it, you can see like, oh no, there was a lot of intentionality going on here in the ways they intersect and coincide. And that's one of my very favorite things about the film, and part of what I think makes the film so propulsive and watchable and fun is the ways each of these stories overlap and intersect with each other. It's really a pretty energizing viewing experience, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to sort of keep up because I didn't know it was anthology at the outset, and then you're just trying to get your bearings on each thing, and they're like, oh, these are not traditional anthologies. So if you aren't going to watch it, the primary stories are Dylan Baker, the actor, speaking of Spider-Man, who played Kurt Connors in Spider-Man 2, yes. Is a principal who you learn has quite homicidal tendencies. Then you have Anna Paquin, and she is part of a quartet of young ladies out on the Halloween town. What you think is looking for some love, and what you find is not quite that. And then you have some actual teen characters, high school kids, who are kind of going to this abandoned area where this story of the town occurred, that plays into the backdrop of the stuff. And then you have that story, this kind of school bus flashback story. So all of these things kind of intersect and overlap, as Reed mentioned, and inventively so. I mean, you'll get a kick out of this. So I saw, of course, Anna Paquin and Brian Cox's name jump out in the opening credits. Dude, the scene when Dylan Baker's in the backyard early, the first time.
Yeah. Right.
I had no clue the neighbor was Brian Cox. I did not.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And to the point that I kept waiting for him to show up.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I got you.
And so then when it finally gets back to that character, I was like, oh, yeah, that was him.
Yeah. Because he looks very different. Like we said, his appearance was patterned after John Carpenter. Brian Cox in virtually every other movie looks nothing like that. That long, sort of frizzy hair, and the mustached appearance and everything. It's really, I don't know quite how to describe this. I tried to count as I was rewatching the film. I think there are either 6 or 7 complete in their own right stories, which overlap and intersect through the course of this film.
Which ones am I forgetting?
So I count the opening sort of salvo, if you will, of the husband and wife who.
Oh yeah.
And so I count that one. Then obviously there's the Dylan Baker with the homicidal tendencies. You overlay that with the background story of the school bus kids who were killed, and then the story of the modern day kids who are going to that quarry to play a prank on one of their new friends. So there's that story.
Oh yeah.
Then
I didn't even say Cox's story. Yeah, you're right.
And then there's Mr. Krieg's story, and then there's the story of the quartet, the girls out for their traditional date night and everything. And so yeah, there's like 6 or 7 different stories that just sort of intersect with one another. And again, as I've mentioned already, I feel like it's really inventive the way that they do that. But I've always had a soft spot in my heart for anthology films anyway, even especially a film like this that is as inventive as it is, but even just the traditional ones like the creep shows or even though they're not my favorite, like the VHS films, I've just always had a really soft spot in my heart for anthologies because there's such a variety within the piece. Even if you don't enjoy everything beginning to end, there's a good shot that there'll be something in there that's worth latching onto.
Well, actually, it's funny because I actually think I like this format a little better than the traditional version because I think, again, it's psychology, but watching that in a traditional setting, you are on this kind of, okay, now I'm closing the door on this story, and I have to sort of buy in on a new mini story. You
Right,
know,
right.
like the Creep Show model, which features quiche pretty heavily. I don't know if you recall that.
You know what? I do.
Yeah. And whereas this one, it kind of plays a little sleight of hand with that format in a way that actually keeps me more invested. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, because you're not completely leaving one to go into a new one. You're kind of dancing between the raindrops, as it were. I will say that this might, as a happily married man of 16 plus years, this is one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. When that top story that you just referenced, it's a husband and wife. My guy says he sleeps till noon, then video games until 4, and the wife is still willing to give him some loving. Like, that is not real.
Would never happen.
Nothing real about that.
That is movie magic.
Yeah.
Yes. Not at all often.
Welcome to Hollywood. Although that said, their front yard's a bit absurd. Come on. I like Halloween.
So much
that's
of it
ridiculous. Yeah, that's my point.
And then he was like, and he was totally going to bow out on like the other unbelievable part of it is she was like, you know what, I'll do it. I'm like,
I'll do it.
Not really?
And
no.
Go watch a dirty movie and get ready for me while I put in all the grunt work of tearing down the stuff that she does not even. Yeah,
you can tell a guy directed this movie.
Yeah.
There ain't no way a woman came anywhere near
and wrote it.
Yeah, no way a woman's perspective came anywhere near the direction or creation of this film.
Nope. You gotta imagine. You gotta imagine Dougherty like shopping the script around, and like anytime a woman reads, well, wait about no, it's fine. I'm gonna let someone else read it. You know.
Yes, yeah,
it's fine.
Said I'm gonna let somebody. I'm gonna take this back. I'm gonna let somebody. I'm gonna get a second.
Is your husband home? Is your husband home?
The husband sees it. I like this. I think you should make this. This is a great script.
Do you need some funding?
I got some. Look, he pulls out his wallet. I got like $6 here, man. Like what can I give you?
How much
to
you
make
need?
This happen?
I want to see this.
You know, it's funny. We're casting a lot of shade on that opening. So I actually do, as a first shot across the bow, I actually love it for its brevity and its focus. It's completely
fun as a little horror piece.
No, absolutely. Because on top of that, after this beautiful, like long-suffering woman, and then all she did wrong was extinguish the candle.
Guy.
Well, there was that too. Was extinguish the candle in the jack-o'-lantern, and she suffers so much from that. Like that's just absurd. But yes,
do you interpret? Okay, now see, that's an interesting note you just made. So, do you interpret? And most of the people listening to this conversation have probably watched this particular movie because it's a little labyrinthine if you haven't. But do you interpret it as purely the snuffing out of the candle, or it's the animus towards Halloween that Sam overhears?
So that's an interesting question. I
think part of it is I'm scared and thinking about the fact that I would put a candle out, and I don't want to get murdered by a little Sam kid, but I don't have animus towards Halloween. So
no, that's a fair point. I think it could be read both ways. I do think you've brought up an interesting point that the general animus towards Halloween is. So I'm going to vote that it is purely the extinguishing of the candle, and I'll tell you why.
Whoa.
Yes, but you bring up a good point about the general animus towards Halloween. The reason I think it is purely the extinguishing of the candle is the entirety of the Brian Cox storyline, which has its own sort of echoes and reverberations back into a different story that you eventually find out. But the entire Brian Cox story is about him not giving out candy. And the Sam character, despite all of the violence that it goes on between them in the little story. So that story that I'm referencing, so listeners can follow along, is that Brian Cox is like a curmudgeonly old man, hates Halloween, is doing nothing for Halloween, and doesn't give any trick-or-treaters any candy. Well, then he's paid a visit by this character we keep referencing, this little Sam character, who is a literal like demonic, monstrous kind of figure, and
Why he's so cute.
He kind of is with that little burlap headdress. But he basically begins to attack and torment Brian Cox's character. And what finally stops him, he goes to stab him with like a broken lollipop. But when he does that,
That was a great moment.
yeah, the lollipop like catches a candy bar that is in his pocket. So once Sam acquires the candy bar, he leaves him alone. And Brian Cox absolutely had a tremendous amount of animus towards Halloween, but once Sam got the candy bar, he left him be and let him live. And so that's why I'm making the case that in that first story, what prompted Sam to go after her was that she extinguished the light, which canceled the tradition, and not merely that she was so antagonistic towards the Halloween holiday, because even though Brian Cox's character remained antagonistic towards the holiday, he clearly learned his lesson and begrudgingly began giving out candy. So so that was really all it took, was for the traditions to be followed, and he would be left alone.
Or did Sam know that the bus kids were out to get Stryker? And so he just knew, well, I got my candy now, so I'm going to let them finish you off.
I'm going to let them take. You know what? You make some good points. I mean, you make some really good points. I think you
I'm
are
just trying to show
clearly.
you I'm thinking about the movie.
I get it. No, I really, really get it. So, but moving on a bit from that, so I have a.
You're just like, wow, Nathan, all I've had is water, Reed, just so you know. There's nothing being imbibed over here. But Reed's just like, okay, I need to finish this one on my own.
So we're gonna move on here. So I wrote down, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dylan Baker as an actor, but the man creeps me out. He is so
He's
creepy.
terrible.
Yeah. That whole, like, in that whole sequence, because he kind of participates in two main stories.
Yeah.
But the first and primary one that he's a part of, that whole front porch vomit fest is just disgusting.
Oh my gosh.
It's awful.
So did I miss something? Did he poison that kid? Did that kid have something before he shot? I kind of missed. I felt like I missed a bit of information, and suddenly that kid was like profusely, like lard ass level vomiting.
Yeah.
And,
So what I think he had come, if my memory serves me, it's been, as of this recording, it's been a couple of days since I've seen it, but if memory serves on these particulars, I think the kid walked up to the front porch, grabbed some of the candy that was on display there,
right.
And then that candy is poisoned. And so that, because Dylan Baker's character is still sitting there talking to him, and he's like,
Killing
oh, there's
kids.
all,
That's
yeah,
right.
well, yeah.
That makes
And he's
sense.
like, oh, there's all these, traditions and blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, and the most important tradition of all, always check your candy. And so I think he, he absolutely was luring the kid into a trap. I also wrote down, this is me trying to be clever and funny and maybe failing at both. But
oh boy.
the little kid just yelled out the window, "Charlie Brown's an a-hole." And I wrote down, like, somebody give that kid a rock, because that's just mean.
No. Someone throw a rock at that kid.
Well, of course, but I'm making a very specific Charlie Brown reference.
I know. I got a rock. I thought about that actually before this episode started recording. That was a long time ago now. Yeah, Dylan Baker's character is wretched.
He's terrible.
As bad as the barfing scene is, what's worse is when you've got decent headphones on and it's just you and the audio, and that barfing scene happens and it's just splashing and sploshing and splorching, and I'm like, oh my god, let's make it stop. This is awful.
It's and then every single time you see him like lurch forward, you're like, no. Pull off the headphones.
I forgot this. This is not in my notes. My wife, who I actually asked her to watch The Host, and she's like, "Nah, I'm good," which is totally fine, whatever. But this particular night, she decides she's gonna sit in the room while Trick or Treat is on. Okay. Barfy guy starts happening, and she would look up from her phone every now and then. I was like, "Hey, don't!" I literally waved her off, like, "No, stop! Don't look at this.
No,
I don't know." And I eventually told her to leave. I was like, "Listen, I don't know what's going to happen in this movie. You should go somewhere else."
The college girls are coming. I don't know what's happening with this college girl.
I didn't know that was coming. No, this is before that.
Leave.
Yeah.
See, I like the dynamic. It just delights me so much. Like the movies, like The Host, Parasite.
I know.
Like these are the films that you're like, no, I don't want to see that. And then these other, like House of a Thousand Corpses, or like Saw, or Trick or Treat. Those are the ones that is like, oh yeah, I think I'll sit in the room with you. That's really
you just decided to sit in on this one. Now, in her defense, she would
That's-
go see Parasite in the theater with me.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, I will give myself slight credit here, even though I didn't recognize him as Brian Cox. Once the bus story starts revealing itself, I was like, I wonder, based on how this movie is constructed, if the neighbor is the bus driver.
Oh, good call on you guessing that. That's pretty cool. First time through, I did not make that connection. I just thought that they were, just connected with the quarry narrative.
Well,
in the
because in the present day quarry narrative with the teens, someone references one of the kids at the bottom of the quarry says, and it's intentionally stood out to me, but what happened to the bus driver? And I was like, you want me to think about that.
Gotcha.
Boy, those kids are terrible to old Rhonda.
They're
That's
so
awful.
I'm not a fan of even the most mild-mannered of pranks. That was just hideous.
You must hate me.
While we're on this,
since you brought it up, Nathan,
let me get some.
That
things off
time
my
you
chest.
did that thing 20 years ago.
No, I have never been a fan of just like pranking or teasing in general. Like it's just not my thing. I don't prefer it.
The other day, so my kids, we're quarantined and we're at home. Nobody can leave the house. My kids are doing online school. I'll have to just check in on them every now and then. Like, hey, what are y'all doing? You farting around on the computer, or you doing schooling?
B- or
the other day, speaking of pranks, so both of them were positioned in such a way that they couldn't see the front of the door to their room.
Okay.
And I'm coming up to check on them. I see him, like, all right. So I just start walking into the room, trying to be real stealthy and then just yell, and it scared the crap out of both of them. Sure enough, it was great. It was beautiful.
Oh
Great dad moment.
Yeah, I was about to say Father of the Year.
I kid you not. 10 minutes later, I come back in to check, and the oldest one has smartly now positioned herself where she can see the front door, but the middle one has not.
Of course.
The middle one is...
You're like, you ain't never learn. Y'all don't never learn.
You gonna learn now. The middle one is laying on the floor, looking at her Kindle, and the older one can see me, right?
Oh,
and I'm like,
no.
Shh. So I creep in and read. I plank. A plank is a maneuver when you just fall out on the floor, next to her, just fall right next to her and bark at her. Oh man. It was glorious. I thought you should barf on me like that kid in this movie.
Man, invite me over to your house. It sounds like a laugh riot, man. Let me not go to the bathroom in your place, because who knows?
Don't. You better not. You should.
Who knows what you've got positioned.
That's where the worst things happen. Oh my goodness.
I didn't need any help, Daddy.
I know. What else do you want to talk about?
Oh my gosh! So the main other thing that I had on my likes dislikes portion is just I love the way the general expectations that they set you up for on the sort of costumed girls story just so drastically pivots. It's one of my favorite turns in the film, because we think for the majority of it that the Laurie character, played by Anna Paquin, is kind of naive, innocent, that she's a bit in danger potentially from this masked man that we have now seen to be a murderer. And then when suddenly that masked
more than that, you think he's a vampire.
Right. Because that's kind of the nature of this film. You think that it's really a monster, and then when he falls from the tree at that little campground where they are, he falls from the tree, starts begging for help, and then it's reveal on top of reveal. First of all, they reveal he's not a vampire. Then they reveal, oh, it's Mr. Wilkins. It's Dylan Baker from the earlier story. And then it's revealed that actually all those costume girls and their tradition for their dates and everything is that actually they are werewolves hunting their prey for whatever ritual of the night it is. I mean, I just love the way it subverts and plays around with all of our expectations in a really fun, inventive sequence. I feel like my favorite overall story of the piece is the story in the with the deceased kids in the bus with the quarry. That kind of is my favorite single story as it is. But my favorite moment in the film is that entire sequence, like from the moment that he falls from the tree till they start their transformations. It's really just a lot of fun in the ways that what you didn't expect to happen begins happening in rapid succession.
Agreed. Well, because again, you think who you don't know is the principal is an actual vampire, and you've got little Sam running around. Like, there is weird supernatural stuff happening in this movie.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So when that turn happens, it was definitively a surprise.
What you got listed for scares?
Speaking of surprises and speaking of poop club, principal guy's kid leaping out from behind the counter when he comes back in from the backyard.
Yes.
Oh my God, Reed, I leapt. I mean, it was like bicycle kick 2.0.
I was gonna say, did you bicycle kick around the room like, woo, 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 woo. Like, oh my God, that kid came up from out the counter. Woo, 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 woo.
Stab him!
Oh,
so that was rough. Actually, now it works for where the film goes, but the assault of what you think is a vampire guy in the alleyway is pretty terrible.
That was pretty awful. Yeah. Again, like, to your point, it sets up the later subversion, like where he is authentically dangerous. He's homicidal, but it sets up effectively the eventual subversion when he gets taken out by the far more menacing monster.
Sure.
In the costumed sort of harem, as it were. What I wrote down for this is I said I think for me the film is a little bit too funny and a little bit too upbeat tonally to be genuinely like scary, but there's some really great like monster moments. There's some really effective creature design, some great jump moments, startle moments. You already mentioned like even something as little as the kid jumping up behind the counter, but there's lots of moments that are, you know, people have their debates about whether or not jump scares are a good thing or a bad thing in horror films, but I think there's some really effective ones in this one, whether or not you prefer that style of horror. But I think the most effective like scare for me is when the Rhonda and the other boy are like going down the elevator to the quarry.
That's great. Yeah.
And she sees all the lit jack-o'-lanterns over in the distance, but her friends, well, she thinks they're their friends, are like screaming and the jack-o'-lanterns are like extinguishing. That's a genuinely affecting kind of moment. You very much sympathize, even as the viewer, with her in that experience, and it is that much more harrowing when you realize all of that was a prank, a very
terrible.
Cruel prank. So then, again, the film is really effective at like subverting and surprising expectations, because then it's revealed to have been a prank, but then after that, the real thing starts to happen, and the real kids start coming back to the real sort of ghosts of the kids start coming back, and then Rhonda will not help these people, and it's difficult to tell in the moment, and honestly, either one works. It's difficult to tell in the moment if her character is just fed up with the prank and like, I'm not going to let you trick me again. That was cruel. I'm moving on. Or if she recognizes that they are really scared and just does not care. So either one would be really effective.
As in, you're saying you can't tell if she thinks they're continuing with a prank?
Yes. I
think she knows. Yeah.
That it's real and is just sort of leaving them to it, which either one is pretty harrowing. But did you have
the whole aesthetic of the flashback, the bus flashback, is terrible. I mean, just that's a
that's
a pretty upsetting story.
No, absolutely, and it's funny because you're kind of, and I mean, you probably had a slightly different experience because you were forecasting in your mind that Brian Cox's character might be the bus driver. But the first time through, I didn't make that connection, so I was kind of, as you typically are in a film, in general, you might be inclined to sort of fear for the victim as he's being assaulted by the little Sam character. But it's interesting when you reveal at the end, or when it is revealed at the end, that he was the now elderly man who had perpetrated that heinous action with the kids so many years ago. Anyway, it's just...
Well, and to be clear, not that it matters a ton, but the bus flashback happens before what I earlier referenced, a character says, but what happened to the driver? So in the middle of the bus flashback, I'm not thinking any of this is
Oh,
connected to the
gotcha.
present day.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Understood. But I have something. So I want to. Do you have anything else on your scares list?
When his window gets egged.
You're a homeowner.
I jumped.
can tell. Yeah. Oh, you jumped.
No,
You're
not
you're
going to damage the
let's-
house. I just jumped. I was like, oh, God. Whoop, 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 whoop.
bicycle kick through the air. So there's something that really stood out to me this time that I think is really, really interesting. That I probably only would have picked up on because we have these kind of conversations to try to mine the depths of more thematic substance. I don't think this ever would have picked if it hit my radar in previous viewings. It didn't register as any sort of concrete point of thought. But I think the film has an interesting underlying theme of what I'm going to call the consequence of ignoring tradition. It is baked into nearly everything. Like the opening sequence, the very first thing we're exposed to is she blows out the candle in a jack-o'-lantern, and he even is like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to leave it lit because it's an ancient tradition. And then she has a consequence for that. In the Wilkins story, he's talking on the porch about all of the traditions of Halloween, including the need to check your candy. And then his little boy Billy is like hounding him about like, oh, it's tradition, let's carve the jack-o'-lantern, which is a hideous scene. And then the kids in the quarry are playing a prank, and they suffer the consequences of playing their little prank where they do and because of what they do. Even what we later find are the ladies that are actually werewolves. They talk about how their costume-themed hunt is a tradition that they keep with, because like when they step out of there and Anna Paquin's character's like, I feel ridiculous. I forget her exact line, but she's like, I look stupid or I feel ridiculous or something. They're like, it's tradition. And then the character of Sam, as I had posited earlier, appears to be kind of this vengeful character that goes after people who don't keep the traditions alive. So this time around particularly, it just really pinged me that what seems to be the common through line of each of these anthology films, and honestly, anthology films are difficult to grasp a singular thematic narrative, just in general, by their nature. They're sequential stories that are beginning, middle, and end, not necessarily depending on having a through line one to the other. So what I found really interesting about this one is the way that they all, in their internal narratives, seem to be dancing with these traditions that are at play, specifically revolving around the night of Halloween, and the potential consequences of ignoring or abandoning those singular traditions, which I found really, really interesting. And I have a couple of other places that I could go along those same lines, but what do you generally think about that?
I mean, if you have more thoughts to follow on that tradition idea, I welcome them. I mean, because
sure, yeah,
I can see what you're scratching at. I don't have an immediate response yet, though.
So what stands out to me is I feel like there's a lot of I'm about to really sort of explode the conversation in some ways that might take us a few minutes or maybe won't take that long at all, but it seems to me there are always, depending upon the subject, there are generally two schools of thought. One that is rooted in and anchored in preserving and observing traditional ways of doing things, celebrating things, actioning things, like rooted in basically this is how it has always been done. Fill in the blank on what subject you're talking about, but this is the way it has always been done. Versus the compulsion and challenge to try to do something more new or inventive, or try to do something a bit more, trying to avoid very volcanic language, but more progressive, trying to do something that is a bit more just, there's the school of thought that would say this is the way it has always been done, and the school of thought that would say, but no, something new is potentially upon you. And what this pinged in me, and this whole series that we've done on this 2020, there's no way that we could have known how much of it would be affected by and influenced by what is happening in the real and the now, and I'll approach it this way. I had posted a video to Facebook not that long ago actually, and had posted something where I was talking about. It struck me in these times that we're in, these seasons of these quarantines and everything shutting down, and I'm seeing a lot of things when I do engage with social media. I'm seeing basically the camps that say, okay, we need to get back to normal as soon as possible, and then other camps that are kind of trying to find their way through coping with what is now and present and at hand. And the other night, I remember thinking, I was having a discussion with my wife about different things that like churches were trying to do and different things that businesses were trying to do. And at one point during the discussion, the thought struck me of people trying so desperately to hold on to normal. And so that's the phrase that I'm going to anchor these thoughts in. People trying so desperately to hold on to normal, and the ways in which, despite the present challenges and despite the present restrictions and despite the present dangers, people trying desperately for things to, as much as possible, look and feel and sound normal. And it's interesting because we are in, generationally speaking, an unprecedented time. There are probably a few people who are still alive that were alive during the pandemic of like 1918 when the big major flu hit the country, and that's the most historically recent thing that this present virus condition has positioned us in that's comparable. Is like, well, what happened in the 1918 pandemic?
Right.
But it just struck me so powerfully of the ways in which people's adaptability and coping mechanisms are really put to the task of trying to navigate these present situations. And I keep coming back to that phrase of like holding on to normal. And again, this film is not interested in any of that. It was made in 2007. What this film does appear to be interested in is, in its own horror-styled way, in positing this extreme blown-up explosion of, oh, well, hold to tradition, hold fast and hold near the traditions that are time-tested and time-honored, or there will be irrevocable, monstrous consequences. Or sometimes the traditions themselves are monstrous consequences in their own right. And so that, combined with our present conditions, has got me really thinking a lot about, again, just normalcy and people who are trying so desperately to navigate these present new challenges by holding on to the version of normal for as long as they possibly can. So I don't know if I'm completely being coherent in wrestling all those thoughts down, but that's what Trick or Treat sort of made me think about in the context of these present situations. So I don't know if that sparks some specific responses.
Yeah, it's a little jumbled. I would say the film itself didn't incite a whole lot of depth in response, but that I kind of like what you're formulating there. And listen, my knowledge of jargon typically turned political is relatively new to the 40 years I've been on Earth. So I will sometimes say things that I don't even myself entirely know what I mean. I just know, generally speaking, here's where I tend to seem to fall. So that being said, insofar as my understanding of some of this stuff, I would typically identify more as quote unquote progressive. And so I hear what you're describing, and I think what's interesting about this sort of paradigm you're propping up here is the difference between symbols of tradition and rigidity of tradition. In other words, what I hear isn't honor Halloween, that the movie is positing honor Halloween in this particular way or else. It is simply, well, honor Halloween. and what that can look like manifest in a lot of different ways.
Yeah,
or can/should. And so taking that sort of view and exploding it out, as you said, to sort of our, not even national moment, but even religious experience. Like, even using this author's name will be a turnoff for some people. But I remember the first time I read Brian McLaren's New Kind of Christian about 15 years ago at this point, and kind of it blew my mind. And there was this really great little nugget in it that has stayed with me a lot, that if, let's say, Middle Ages Christians could somehow get in a time machine and look at us today, they would say, well, you're not Christians. You know what I mean? Like the visual, the representation, the manifestation is so dramatically different. Like, to assume that a particular iteration or expression of faith, and the movie uses Halloween, but I think, if I'm picking up what you're putting down, you're even adopting that notion into kind of our faith experience.
Yes,
in this modern moment, like
our faith experience, our cultural experience, our all of it.
The willingness to have some flexibility while still owning those signals and symbols and tent poles and icons of whether it's your national identity or your religious identity. Like, I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but I just in that stream of, like, you can be in the movie's context, you can honor Halloween and have a ton of stupid decorations in your yard. You're still honoring Halloween, or maybe she's not, but we're splitting hairs here. But the point being,
sure, yeah, right.
There are a lot of different ways it can look, and I would definitively say that for a faith expression too. Like, what is or has to be quote unquote Christian should not be so rigid that you are no longer permitting the newness and revelation of God to appeal to you and still be called that. Anyway, I don't know if that made any sense or not.
Well, and one of the first thoughts that I had is that rigidity is most closely associated with death. Things that are alive are traditionally much more malleable, flexible. Like Christ in the Scriptures never hails anything that is dead or unmoving as a good quality. Like he describes the Spirit as the wind. You don't know where it's going or where it came from, but there's so many ways in which we will try very hard to manifest structures that, and lest I beat too much up on the structural drum, structures can provide stability and structures can provide safety. And, there's the old example that if children are on a playground with no fence around it, then they tend to stay pretty huddled in the center of that field because of fear of the edges. But if there's a boundary in place, if there's a clearly defined sort of fence, then they'll walk right up to the edge of the fence and they'll know exactly where they can stop and where they can go. So I'm not beating up on the idea of structures as a concept, certainly not. But I do think there can be times at which the structures themselves become more important than the reason those structures were put in place. And that the aims...
Because... go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no. I can end it with this statement. The aims which produced those structures can sometimes become secondary to the structures, and that's where you get things backwards. That's when you get rigidity, because now you're no longer adopting a structure so that you can move forward in freedom and life. Instead, you are bowing to an idol that you have crafted and fashioned, and now that structure is the end of the conversation.
Because ultimately, in your analogy of a playground and a fence here, whether you're 5 years old or 105 years old, the point is still to not need the fence. Maturity and growth and wisdom will propel you in a direction, if cultivated properly, to where you can say, I don't need the physical boundary. I don't need understand the nuance here, to use your terminology, the structure to keep me where I'm quote unquote supposed to be. I mean, my wife sent me a quote recently, and I'll hit and run on this, but it's pinging with me as you're saying this. It was a quote that was found, hold no ill will towards us, but she was like, this sounds like something you would affirm. And it was basically that conservatism is the worship of dead things. And I was like, wow, that's strong, but it is exactly what you're describing. You know, take out the politically charged word conservatism here, but the idea that when all of the boundaries and structures we've put up historically then themselves become the point, means we've lost the point.
Absolutely. I mean, it still baffles me, and I'll say this, and then maybe after that we can sort of wind it down. But you know, the story in the scriptures still boggles my mind about when the and I think I've referenced it on this show before, that when the Hebrew children were in the wilderness, and then Moses was up on Mount Sinai, supposedly, well, not supposedly, this is what he was doing, communing with the Lord and gaining direction about where the people were supposed to go. Well, he was taking so long with it that they eventually pulled together their jewelry and their earrings and compelled Moses' brother Aaron to make a golden calf. Like, they compelled him to burn down the gold, fashion the gold into this calf, and then they began to worship the calf. And there are so many different ways to go in that story. What I'm going to hold on to in the context of the conversation we're having here is they either forgot or willfully ignored that they made that thing. They created it. And then when they created it, they begin sort of hailing it as far beyond the station that it actually was. Fundamentally, it was still a figure, an image. And we can, in our own ways, when the structure works for us, that is good. Great. It works, and it is providing substantive health and forward motion, and that's a good thing. But it becomes rapidly very unhealthy when you, as we're talking about, you begin to sort of police adherence to the structure, which is how I would consider this, like, Sam character. That's
a great way to put it.
When you begin to authoritarianly, that's not a real word, but authoritatively begin to police and demand that this structure be adhered to at all costs, by all means, you're in a very precarious situation, and you find yourself, and this will be kind of my final word on the subject for myself, you find yourself then in the position, as I believe perhaps the Pharisees found themselves in so many times, to where now suddenly they are bound to the structure, and are so bound to the structure that when the very Son of God stands in their midst, they don't recognize him. And even beyond that, are openly antagonistic towards him, because all they can see is their own power structures, their own power dynamics, their own systems, which they themselves have crafted and shifted from good places, from, like, sourced in good things, but very rapidly becoming not good things in how they are uncharacteristically positioned. So that listeners are not unclear, what I think, to tie a bow on this for myself, what I think the film is playing with is, I think the film is, as all great horror does, it is exploding a concept of, you better adhere to traditions, because if you don't adhere to traditions, then little burlap head Sam is going to come and get you, or some monstrous evil thing is going to happen to you. And so that's what the film is positing, and obviously it's in the context of horror. I think the nugget that I'm gleaming from is in the context of the virus we find ourselves in at the moment, and in the context of the longer lasting faith and life walk, is be very cautious of how rigidly you worship and consider the structures in which you operate, lest you put them ahead of the aims for which those structures were initially installed to begin with. And always be mindful that it is the aim that you are after, not maintaining the structure itself. Jesus himself used the example, man, I keep trying to wind this down, but then things keep popping up in my head. Jesus himself said to the people, and they didn't know what he was talking about, but he said to the people, he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll make it rise again. And to them, that was terribly scandalous, because they were like, well, it took us centuries to build this temple. You're talking lunacy here. What are you talking about? But I think in the context of this conversation, what's pinging me at the moment is this idea of, like, this structure is a structure. That's what it is. And we know in the context of that scripture that Jesus was talking about his own death and resurrection. But I think a principle that could be quelled out from there is the structure is the structure, and it is valuable, it is important, it has its place. But if you ever get to the place to where you mistake the structure as being the end of the story or the end of the conversation, you're in a very precarious position to miss what God has for you.
The story,
or the point of the story, exactly. You're in a very precarious position to miss what the Lord has for you, what life has for you, what the future has for you, and be very wary and cautious of adopting that attitude too firmly and too strongly. And I'm going to end my sermon there. So.
Well, amen, brother. I don't want Sam coming for me.
No, not at all.
You feel like going to the fog meter?
Let's do it. Bring us to the fog meter, sir.
Indeed. So on every episode of The Fear of God, where we cover a film, generally speaking, we measure those films on a metric of fear and God. How scary-ish was a thing? How substantive-ish was a thing? It's a very flexible metric. On a scale of 1 to 10, Riri, how do you rate Trick or Treat by Michael Dougherty on the fear measure?
I'm going to be gracious towards this film because it's not, it's probably not going to give you too many like outright nightmares, but it's got some great macabre imagery and some really effective jump scares, some really great monster designs. So I'm going to be a little generous here. I'm going to give it an 8.
That is generous. That's not unfairly generous. That is more generous than I thought you'd get. I think for me, the enjoyment factor of this film is just how much it kind of keeps you on your toes with pivoting left and pivoting right. And I agree. I mean, the creature design is fantastic. The design of Sam is fantastic. A couple jump scares, some truly unsettling kind of story elements. Not quite as high as you, but I'll go with 7.
All right. What would you say for the God meter?
I don't, in one viewing, it doesn't feel like it has a ton on its mind other than just fun, like celebratory Halloween type of stuff.
Yes.
So from that standpoint, this is going to sound mean, but I don't intend it as such. I think I'm going to go with a 4. It feels
okay.
Kinda, there's nothing there, but not much of something either.
No, I agree. I want to, as we often have when this happens, I want to sort of hang a lantern on the fact that I think a lot of what I gleaned from the film was a lot of what I brought to it as well, both in the context of what's happening in the world around us and in my own particular thought patterns as well. So, again, I'm going to be a bit generous, but along the same lines, and I'm going to give this a 6 for its God meter along those same lines.
Well, in the spirit of that and of Sam, we will give Trick or Treat from 2007, your number 4 on your list, a 6 out of 10 on the fog meter. I almost
Very
forgot
nice.
what that number was for a second there.
The more pressing question is: would you recommend Trick or Treat to people?
I think so. I mean, it is. I don't think there's a ton of kind of food for thought per se, but in terms of just fun, more fun than you might expect out of it, and some definitive twists and turns that are pleasant from a horror perspective. Yeah, I think it's a fun little flick.
Yeah, and I definitely think, like, for horror fans, absolutely, it's a very fun film. I think you'll really find a lot of enjoyment out of it. So if you're a fan of the slasher film or even the anthology sort of dynamic, you really owe it to yourself to check this film out. High recommendations there. For the casual viewer, I don't know, but yeah, definitely a high recommendation for any horror fan. So that puts yet another episode of 2020 fully and completely in the books. Next week,
Penultimate episode.
this is the penultimate episode. That's right, because next week we are going to be pivoting to the final episode of this phase. This is a year-long journey for us through this 2020 series. But concluding this phase and temporarily putting a pause on the overarching series, next week we are going to be counting down your favorite horror films of 2008. And we will be covering a film that I don't know how many of you have heard of, so seek it out. It is called Pontypool. That's Pontypool. Seek out the film Pontypool. That is going to be the subject of next week's ultimate installment of this phase of 2020. Nathan, as always, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Really appreciate it, man.
It's a pleasure.
And as we say on every single episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. So.
And wash your hands.
And do that as well. We'll see you next week, everybody.
See you next week, guys.
Bye.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. Start by visiting thefearofgodpodcast.com for all the latest episodes and news, as well as for merchandise and how to contact us. You can follow us on Twitter @thefearofgod, on Instagram @fearofgodpodcast, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. Special thanks to Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com for our artwork, to Lee Wright and Reed Lackey for our theme music, and to Tyler Smith and morethanonelesson.com for making our show possible. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, and if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating and a review. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
I think my favorite, creepy moment.
Hey, pause for
Are,
one
are you
second.
okay?
Yeah. I'm sitting at a window. I don't know if you know that. And
Yeah,
I mean, it's midnight here, and some people got out of a car, and I was just making sure it wasn't something
Are you okay?
untoward.
Do you need to check it out?
And you're clearly just dropping somebody off, but I'm sure it's fine. Sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So, I will be cutting all of this out, but one of the most unsettling experiences is to be talking to you about a movie like Trick or Treat and about these versions, and all of a sudden, because we don't always can see each other. Tonight, coincidentally, we happen to be able to see each other, and suddenly I see your face as you are very attentively looking out the window, clearly not at me, and a concerned, does daddy need to go take care of something, look, hit your face, and I'm like, what are you seeing? And because
So funny.
I recognize mentally that you are miles and miles away from me, but there's still this moment where you're like, what is behind me? What do you see in my view screen that I can't
I know.
ascertain?